Well, good morning, everybody. Thank you for joining us today. This is the 2nd of May 2025. We're coming up to a year of podcasting. It's was May, June last year that we started. So for those of you that have been with us all of that time, it's good to have you listening and contributing to the conversation. As we come to our next episode, just comment that thank you for being with us. And now this month we can say we're now broadcasting on Spotify, so that some of the episodes, the legacy episodes that we've recorded, will now be available on Spotify. It's not live there, but it will be episodes that we have been presenting. We are on YouTube, and obviously here we're on LinkedIn, broadcasting live. So thank you. If you're here for the first time, please do like, follow and subscribe. It really does help us to sort of build the story and help us to get into the conversations. So this morning, my guest, you've been in a career for some time, and there are people that you admire from a distance. You've heard of them. You sometimes get the opportunity to have a chat. Well, for me, that's the conversation this morning. A colleague here this morning, Frank Norris, joins me. I'll let him introduce himself in terms of the way, but it's one of those conversations with someone you've admired from afar and listen to and take note of what they say. So, Frank, good morning. Thank you.
Hello.
For joining me.
Yeah, well, thank you for inviting me. I have to say, normally on a Friday morning at this time, it's the one morning when I go and take our eldest granddaughter to school. So because I'm here, my wife has got up early today to do it. So a big call out to Arlene Norris, who has just left the building. But I'm really pleased that she's given me the chance today to chat to you, Chris, because I think we met, didn't we, at an event only about a year or so ago?
Yes. Yeah, it was a BISA event, a roundtable event. And obviously, Frank, your name has been known around the education world for some time, so it was a pleasure to meet there. But just tell us a bit about your journey in the education world and the not education world.
Well, I don't want to sort of bore people with this, but I think I do feel as though I'm a big. I do understand that context is really important, so knowing the backstory as to why Frank Norris is here, why he's talking to Chris now, is just as important for a school in terms of knowing the backstory as to why are things the way they are now. Yeah. So I think, and when you get to my age, where I'm sort of semi-retired, it does give you a little bit more time to reflect on some of those events that happened in your career that were quite influential. And I think for me, I was born to an Irish mother and an East End father, who, when they got married, lived in the East End of London. And my father was a tailor's cutter, and my mother was a maid. And my mother heard about a new town that was being built in Essex on the coast, Basildon. Where they were just giving houses away, in a way, wanting people to rehouse there. And she went home to my father after work and said, let's go and have a look. And he was so East End. He said, there's no way I'm going to be taken out of the East End in a coffin. But a week or so later, they're in Basildon, and they saw the new houses. And so Ford, the car manufacturer, built a plant out there. And my father ended up getting a 3-bedroom end terraced house, brand new, with a garden. And my father got a job at Ford's working on the line. And in a way, that meant that I was then an Essex boy. And I was one of 3 children. My brother, Barry, who passed away last year, was an HMI with Estin. He was the specialist advisor for English. So it's really strange because I got to an HMI role as well. And we both had a similar sort of journey, but his education journey was very different to mine. So he passed his 11 plus, went to a high performing school. I failed. I didn't pass it. So I went to the secondary modern, as they're called, but it was about 15 miles away because we were Catholic. I went to a school in Southend. And that experience that I had at that school It wasn't the highest academic school, but we were sitting opposite. We were located opposite Westcliff Grammar School for boys, Westcliff Grammar School for girls, two of the highest performing secondary grammar schools in the country. But actually, the curriculum, the curricular experience was really rich at my school. So, I remember quite a lot of enjoying history, enjoying English, not really being too bothered about the exams. I think these were going to happen, but the expectation was that most of us would get CSEs and would go into a trade. But actually, I ended up doing all right. I managed to get enough, and then went off to the grammar school to study my A-levels, where I faced for the first time really high academic achievement and bailed out. I took an opportunity. I had a health condition, so I had something called a spontaneous pneumothorax, which actually meant that one day at school, my lung collapsed on itself just instantly, and it felt like I didn't know what a heart attack was, but that's what it felt like. So I ended up having a number of operations and was stuck in a hospital and whatever. So I was gradually, as I went to the grammar school, gradually losing contact with the students, gradually losing contact with the course. So that when I recovered, the head teacher said, "You'll have to go down a year." And that was like, oh, terrible. So I left on the Thursday and got a job in a bank on a Friday.
Wow.
And how things have changed. But that bank, but those sorts of experience, that sort of rich experience of being involved in school plays, being involved in sport, being given leadership responsibilities, all of that was really quite important. The academic element of it. And I do a podcast with a colleague called Stan Johnson, and Stan, every week he talks about, it's about experiences. Young people need experiences, and for me, I think I got the experiences more than I did the academic element of it at that school. But going into the bank, I was really lucky. I started doing my banking exams, and that meant going off to college in the evening. So I remember studying economics, law, and just thinking, wow, this is really interesting. We've never studied this at school, but this is really the heart of it for me. So I was successful in my banking exams and was put on a leadership training course at about 19, which still was so good. It was a residential 19-year-old going off to a hotel. It really felt as though somebody was investing in me. But as it turned out, I ended up switching career and going into teaching. And all of those experiences have influenced my sort of journey, my teaching journey. So can I take you on that journey now?
Yeah. Before we go to that, as we've talked, I spent 11 years teaching in Basildon in the centre of the Plotlands.
Ah, right.
Where you've just talked about that, and I think all these years later, there's still some legacy of that East End London sort of to the Basildon area. And I know St Thomas More. I've got colleagues that work there, so that the schools that you refer to, it's home ground. That's.
Oh well, I had no idea.
No, neither did I. So it's but it's a small world, isn't it? And I can say those schools, I work with those schools in those areas, and the ambitions are still there. I know the member of staff that's doing the sort of placement work within St Thomas More now has got real ambition to see learners get out and and get experiences of the work environment. So shout out for Alison, if you're listening. It's keep going. It's good stuff.
Well, if she is, I'd love to be invited back. I really would.
I'll talk to her.
Love that. But yeah, I have to say, just before we move on to the career, then that there was a guy called Dave Mill, and Dave was he did his A-levels at Westcliff Grammar School for boys, and he came over and did a year's he did a year's teaching at St Thomas More as a history teacher before he went off to train. So he was sort of like unqualified teacher. He was amazing. He had such a knowledge of history, and he excited me a lot about history. He went off to train, then came back and spent his entire career at St Thomas More. But he was an amazingly gifted teacher, and I'm really proud. He came to our wedding, and I still send him Christmas cards and things. So he's an amazing teacher, and I was very fortunate. I was disappointed I didn't get I didn't pass the 11 plus, but in hindsight, I probably would not have coped well with that academic element that my brother experienced when he went to his school in Hornchurch. But it's interesting, our journeys, our career journeys meshed together towards the end. And, I think it's been an interesting journey. I mean, I started teaching in Stockport at a primary school. It was during the period where there was no recruitment going on because there was too many teachers. But the Catholic sector, the faith sector, was still recruiting. So I managed to get a job at a local Catholic school, which actually has been the place where our children went to school, our grandchildren go to school. So we have really got roots in this area. But again, I quickly used that. I was ambitious to be a head teacher. I wanted. I don't know why I wanted. I think it was probably some of the experiences I had at school, where I had some leadership opportunities, but also had the chances in the bank. And then I came into teaching, and no disrespect to the head teacher that recruited me, but this was not leadership. This was management. He was managing the school. He's not leading the school. And so I remember in my first year of teaching, I had 46 children in an upstairs classroom, and he only came into the classroom once in that year. There was no, I don't know. He came in because the registers hadn't been collected, so he came to collect a register, walked in, grabbed the register off the desk and walked away.
Management job.
I could see though that wasn't good enough. I couldn't articulate. I didn't really know why, but I just felt sort of left marooned. And I got through, and then managed to get a couple of posts in very different schools. One where I moved on to a job as a middle leader, again in Stockport. But if anybody's into their sport, it was a school where John Amaechi was one of the students. So John is an MBA, or was an MBA basketball player, an amazing. He was incredibly tall, even at the age of 10. He was just he dwarfed over us. But it was a school where they had a brass band. They did major concerts. It was only a single form primary school, but it punched well above its weight, and it was again around. Outdoor pursuits were really important. This full range of opportunity was at the heart of what drove that school. So I landed well there, and actually managed to formulate what an education philosophy might look like if and when I ever got a headship. So that came in 1988 at the age of 30. I was actually appointed at 30, so I'd only had 6-7 years experience as a teacher before I became a head. And that was in Trafford, in a school in a council estate, the area of Partington, which had been built, Newtown, been built when they began to rehouse people from the Hume estates in central Manchester. And there was very little there in the way of resources. So there were a few pubs, but there was, very lacking community centres and things like this. So the schools became quite important. The school was very run down. It had a very poor reputation, had low numbers. But again, I remember going to it and just, you think, oh, nowadays you'll be thinking, oh, right, well, we've got to get the reading up. We've got to do this, we've got to do that. My main focus at that time, it was pre-Ofsted, pre-SATs, was, how can I excite the children to want to come? What is it that we're not doing? And some of that was around the relationships that some of the staff had with the children, which were, I don't think were really genuine. I don't think they were honest relationships. This was about some, and there were amazing staff. We were able to appoint some amazing, but there were two members of staff in particular who were there just for themselves, and everything was being done for them. And that was a big struggle for me as a very, very inexperienced sort of leader to take on, this and to shift them on. Now, eventually we did. But I look back on those years at that school and think about some of the community work that we did, some of the work that we did when we lost the roof in the hurricane. you know, if we didn't have those connections with that community, you know, we would have been there on our own. But actually, the whole community valued our school at that point. Everybody mucked in. And again, you know, we were lucky to a point. Not lucky. I think we were effective in attracting staff who wanted to make a difference in those sorts of schools. And you know, the context of that was really important, because and it runs all the way through this, that I feel as though, you know, we were appointing staff who understood the challenges and were willing to bend and flex in order to serve the needs of those children. This was not a model. This was about every child being an individual, and every family having different circumstances. And we wanted to engage with that. You know, we wanted to understand that community. So I stayed 4.5 years, really, you know, a joyous 4.5 years where I made mistakes. And, you know, some of those, I look back on them now and think, oh my goodness, you know, but actually having a group of staff around you who didn't accommodate them, they were honest with you, saying, well, I didn't work out very well, did it? But actually, you know, having that relationship, I think, was part of what was part of me. I think that's also going back to some of that leadership training that I had very early on, about not being, you know, seeing yourself as a leader, but leading with the team, you know. So, and I think that's something I got from my banking experience, and this idea that I managed to enable. I was happy for staff to come and tell me that if I'd mucked it up, you know. And I think that led on to the second headship, and that landed really well. I mean, the school had won the BBC Carol competition 2 years running. You know, I remember the first assembly I did in that school was about senses, and I was talking about Stevie Wonder, and Duncan started playing Superstition on the keyboard to accompany it. So, well, like, honestly, and I'd had a real sort of interest in contemporary dance, and I was, you know, young enough to be engaging in that, and so I was able to bring a sort of a broader perspective to the arts, to what they had. But again, you know, quite a liberal sort of environment. You know, I think there were high standards in that school. You know, we drove very high standards. We didn't have to work as hard to encourage the children to read. There was a lot more support at home. And I, you know, I had a lot of very progressive, very ambitious staff who wanted to get involved in stuff. And, you know, I landed really well at that school. We got, I mean, it's not about, by that time we'd had Ofsteds and things, but, you know, it was just joyous, you know. So a call out to all of those amazing people at Lower Park Primary School in Poynton. And I still see the head teacher who took over from me, Ian. You know, we occasionally meet up, and, you know, I think, can I just say one thing? I mean, I've stood down from a role, and on a number of occasions, and how you, if you're taking on a new role or you're leaving a new role, you know, leaving an old role, then actually that relationship between the former person and the new person, I think, is quite important. You know, you don't have to be mates, or you don't have to agree with everything. No. I do think there's probably, you know, and it's part of that contextual journey, you know, that it's, and I've done this in the past, so please, you know, I'm not critical of anybody for if this has happened. I'm critical of myself, but it's very easy to get to be, oh, well, why did they do that?
Yeah.
Well, actually, the context of it is, no doubt they made their decision was made, and it was done, you know, what they thought was the right decision. It may not have ended up as a great decision, but actually contextually, it's difficult to put yourself in the shoes of somebody who's made that decision, because you don't know the evidence that's required to understand the reasons why that was made. So so I've learned as I've moved in and out of jobs to value the contextual situation in which people find themselves, and to try to get to understand that a little bit more, because all of that played into my years. Was it 11 years? 11 years as an HMI, where I think I got my profile. All right. So I was then leading, like we're currently doing, Ofsted's currently trying to do a revision of its inspection framework. I want to put it out there, folks. It's flawed. What if they run what they've got now? It's not good. And I have, I was responsible for the introduction of contextual value added measures, responsible for the development of the self-evaluation form, the development of a sort of focus of inspection being on, you tell us what you're doing, give us an evaluation, let's look at whether or not that holds up. A much more collaborative approach. The 2005 model of inspection, the one we call the David Bell one, which some people feel was the death knell of Ofsted. But to be honest, we couldn't carry on inspecting with massive teams, with weeks of notice. We had to shift it because actually what we need to do is to have an emerging inspection framework, one that takes stock of what's gone before and actually sort of morphs into something slightly different. And we're not there at all with this. It feels as though what we've got now is, let's just go back to what we used to do. Let's forget about Ruth Perry. Let's forget about the coroner's report. Let's forget about the Education Select Committee. Let's forget about the various surveys that I've been involved in, which have said that, many people do not have a high level of trust in Ofsted. Now, you cannot have a school inspection system that doesn't have the trust of the sector. So there's a lot going on here. But for me, those 11 years were the hardest 11 years of my working life, and I ended up living a lot of the week in London, 3 young children here, a lot of pressure on my wife, and some pretty, you get to the top of these organizations and you think, naively, well, they must be pretty good because they got to the top. Well, don't assume that at all, because I as I got up this morning, I was remembering a phone call that I had, working sort of 70 or 80 hours a week, decided that one Wednesday, I think it was, at lunchtime, I'd go for a run. So I think we talked before, Chris, didn't we? It's this way. These are my little outlets now. So my guitars and things. But at the time, I needed to
ask about those in a moment. But
well, I don't know. I'm just rambling on now. So if you need to catch up with me and sort of pull me around, please do. But I remember going out for a run. I was doing sort of 10Ks and whatever quite regularly. And I was working massively long hours on a framework. And a senior manager phoned me on my mobile, didn't have it. So phoned the home number, and my son was here. And so she said, where is he? Where is he? So he said, well, he's out on a run. And so I then came back from a run, noticed the missed call, and I phoned the manager, and she said, where were you? Where were you? I said, well, I went for a run. I was literally out an hour, like, like having lunch. So she said, you need to put that, you should have put that in your diary. At that point, I thought, stuff this.
Yeah.
Honestly, that was that was probably the way in which that was the clearest signal to me about how much I was valued as an individual.
Yeah.
As to, it was about just you protecting me. It's all around the queen bee, the king bee, whatever it is, king bee, but you know what I mean? It's all about the boss, I get that. But actually, you as a senior manager in the organization, you have a responsibility for me. And I felt as though I was, in a way, I was so deeply rooted in a lot of these issues, that actually I thought I deserved to be treated a lot better than that, And so anyway, I ended up with 11 years getting to what's called a director of this, that, or other thing, but it was, in that time, I, introduced the two frameworks in 9 months, one for Miriam Rosen and HMI, Tewkesbury Inspector, and one for Michael Wilshaw. I still see Michael Wilshaw now and again. We never fell out. We don't fall out. We don't agree on a lot of things.
That's a relationship.
But I have to say that's it, and he accepts that, and I think that all credit to Michael. I remember one day feeling quite low, and often his door was always open in the Ofsted building, and he just said, "Oh, just come in, let's have a chat." And I remember spending 2 hours with Michael, just like this, just chatting, and he he had a very definite take. It's still about leadership for him. The whole thing is about leadership. Forget the curriculum, forget this. If you haven't got good leaders in a school, you're really stuffed. And that's at every level. He's not just about head teachers. So I think it's, and I do have quite a lot of sympathy with that. You can easily get into the bushes, if you go too far, and that's really where signs of a lack of focus as to what you can be achieved during inspection, and actually what school improvement is about, rather than just inspection. You need to have a sort of very clear philosophy, which I think too often, I get called up when things go wrong for advice, and it's fairly clear from the conversation that the person I'm speaking to is not clear in their own mind what they were trying to achieve. And so going back to my journey, I think all of these experiences have influenced me to the point where I feel as though I've got it in my head what it's about, and I've tried to not make it too complicated,
You've talked about.
Sorry, I've rabbited on there for too long. I'm really sorry about
that. I'd love to listen, because there's so many things that the perspective that people bring. But so I'm conscious that we've just got an hour. So
yeah.
2 or 3.
Sorry, anyone listening. I'm sorry you've had to listen through Frank's story. But that thing about the relationship at Ofsted with senior managers, I think, is quite important. I think that's a bit you don't get to see.
Yes.
From the outside.
But and you've talked about, in a sense, passing the baton on, the importance of relationship, and whether you agree or disagree, how we make decisions based on the information that we have at the time, and others don't have that perspective. And there is a degree of that, the improvement service that Ofsted is intended to be, need to understand the decisions that were made in that context, because it's easy to settle, so the high level views come in, the helicopter and this, that, and is wrong, but people have made decisions based on what's there. And now, we can challenge those decisions, and we can challenge the basis on which they're there. But it's an interesting perspective, Frank.
Well, it's interesting that you should mention that, because there's a lot of discussion at the moment about RISE teams.
Yes.
Isn't there? And I look back on my career as an HMI when I had inspected before I became an HMI, but I had a year of secondment where I was mentored by Miriam Rosen, who became the chief inspector. Miriam was all over our work the whole year. This wasn't about, I'll do a couple of inspections and you're on your own. Miriam supervised our work for the entire year, and it was the best bit of professional development I ever had. But actually, what I worry about when I joined as an HMI in 2001, Terry Turner, my mentor was Terry Turner, secondary head teacher out, and a former secondary head teacher out in sort of Suffolk way. He said, what are your political beliefs? What have you not done? So I said to him, well, I told him what my political beliefs were, and he then said, well, where have you? So you've been you're a primary school head teacher, aren't you? Really, that's what you are. I said, yeah. He said, well, have you ever visited an independent school? No. Have you ever visited a prison? No. Have you ever visited a secure estate? No. Have you ever inspected overseas? No. So what he did in that year, even though I'd inspected loads, I was not allowed to inspect until I'd completed that year and had experienced the broad range of education provision. Now, what that did for me was it connected me with all the bits, well, not all of them, but some of the bits, more of the bits.
Yes.
And so what concerns me a little bit, because I think that contributed to me understanding the context of education, the ecosystem. And what worries me a little bit about RISE and about inspectors is just the narrowness of their experiences. That's not their fault, but actually the multi-academy trust world has ended up with sort of senior leaders coming through a quite narrow range not in every case, don't get me wrong,
No,
but
no,
a narrow range of experiences. And actually, you only know what you know.
Yeah.
You only know what you've seen. You only know what you've visited. Going back to experiences, they're very, very important.
Yeah.
So I think for me, the risk here is that, yes, we need the very best, but actually, of that very best, how broad are their experiences? Now, some of the RISE advisors are very experienced. I'm not decrying that, but some of them don't appear to be. So I always feel as though, if you've been around the block a few times, you've seen quite a lot of stuff. It's easier to I think it's safer to evaluate. It's not accuracy, but it's probably gives you a better understanding about circumstances and about why things are as they are. Than somebody who's had quite a narrow range of experiences, quite predictable experiences, So I think, there's something here about valuing the RISE teams. If they're to be of any value whatsoever, they need to get back to the old HMI highly respected sort of position. And in some respects, I'm not quite sure what they're offering, but what if they're really, really, really good and they're very experienced, they will bring 20, 30 years of experience, from a broad range of settings. And so actually making sure that everybody's falling into that category is quite important. And I know some of the colleagues who are, and some of them are brilliant, but not all of them, and there's a limit to how many of these brilliant people there are around.
And I guess that's the issue, isn't it? I mean, the capacity of the system, 24,000 schools in the state sector in England, 1,300, 1,400 independent schools all through, having enough people that have got the capacity to do what you're describing in that arena is significant. The richness of my last 15 years has been stepping out of that kind of bubble and looking at the independent sector and primary, secondary, nursery, primary, secondary, and then FE, giving the chance to see what education looks and feels like in those different circumstances. It does change your perspective. You get very narrow to that view. I'm just going to pause for a second and just say thanks for those of you that are commenting. If you would like to sort of engage in the conversation, please do put a message on LinkedIn or YouTube. I will see it here, and we'll try and draw your comment in. Thank you to those that have already just made a comment. We are on LinkedIn, YouTube, and will be on Spotify. So you may be seeing this later than the recording. Please do like, share, and subscribe. It's great to have you here, but sharing the material beyond this conversation is valuable to us, and I'm sure to yourselves. Frank, I'll just take on a little bit in your journey, because the title of this was about we call it sector analysis, but that idea of kind of economic development, thinking about your journey. So you've gone from banking through the education system to HMI, and then you took a different
well, I ended up around 2012 with Michael Wilshaw. 2 frameworks in 9 months is enough to see anybody off, to be honest. So I decided to stand down. I got a job working for a Stockport Council as a sort of senior advisor. But then during that year, I was approached by the Co-op, who were running a small multi-academy trust, and I eventually became their CEO. So I was there for 6 years, and that's where I got involved with the Northern Powers Partnership, because the Co-op were a member of the Northern Powers Partnership. And the issues around context, around community, around economic regeneration, all of these are at the heart of the cooperative movement, So I became entwined in the world of cooperation, and also in regeneration, and more recently in the world of devolution. So yesterday were elections for the mayoral sort of structure around the country. And I think for me, in more recently, I've become sort of particularly interested in sort of FE and skill development generally. And I think that there are times when we in a way, I can say this knowing that, because I can say this even though I know it's difficult for school leaders to do this. But, I really do feel as though we're at a point that you think about what's happening in the devolution world, that we have probably the most heavily centralized management system of education in probably in many of the major nations. So, but we're starting to see devolution, and we have devolution of a skills budget and agenda going down to mayors, and I don't think it's going to be too long before we see them leaning into stuff which traditionally was not their bag. So, for example, in Manchester, Andy Burnham has got this baccalaureate that he's developing with a commitment from secondary school head teachers that they will flex their options in such a way that they create 2 potential routes. Now, the reason why they've been able to do that is they've interested the businesses in the city, because they can see that actually there is a gap emerging between what the young people are doing in school and what those businesses require. So there is a very, very clear economic plan for the city of Manchester, and that plan is not as well articulated in some other areas. So, and mayors are working towards that, but Burnham's leading, and so I think that it's going to be interesting to see how a quite centralized curriculum model in some multi-academy trusts will be able to flex and bend sufficiently to meet the needs of a local economic regeneration plan, which is being driven by a regional mayor. So I think that that we need to be open to this, and I think people, even in primaries, they need to be thinking about there's going to be an expectation that things will shift, and I think that we need to make sure that we're I hate this term ahead of the curve, but make sure that you're thinking about that. Thinking about what, making some curriculum decisions now. It's probably worthwhile having in mind what may happen in the future, because we have another 4 years, I think, or so of this government. If they were to get re-elected, or even if the mayoral structure stays the same, and people like Burnham continue, then the winds of change are blowing, and they'll be blowing even stronger then. So I think that gets you to the point about, why we're here, what we're teaching, why we're teaching it. Are we doing enough to engage with local businesses? Do we really know when they say, "Oh, kids haven't got the skills"? Well, I do speak to some major business leaders, and they say that, but I speak to others who say no. But actually, I think engaging with them is really important, and not to do it superficially. I'm really impressed with the way that my former trust has developed a program which engages with businesses and encourages a lot more entrepreneurship, a lot more leadership opportunities. It's just amazing what a couple of the colleagues have managed to do there, but it's driven by an understanding that businesses like the Co-op, they require a diverse workforce, and at the moment we have a system which basically makes it difficult for some children to progress. We have an examination system which probably isn't really fit for purpose. It's world leading, they say. We can all believe the hype, but actually, I'm not quite sure that a system that actually makes it look as though a third of kids every year, regardless of the standard, are not going to meet the grade that's expected. It ramps up standards perhaps, or maintains a standard from one year to the next, but the economic damage of that is quite significant. And it's probably the messaging as well. So we've got an accountability system that over relies on English and maths. So we talked before, I think, Chris, earlier, about the double counting of maths and English, when maths and English is in all the other subjects. Exactly. The impact of that double counting, I'm not sure has been really sort of thought through, not just in the way the data's analysed, but some of the curriculum choices that are being made about how much time is being devoted to particular subjects, the pressure on the number of English and maths teachers that are required. All of this is playing out, and at the end of the day, we've got schools that are not offering that broad experience.
Well, we've seen that, haven't we, with the looking at the subjects, that the broad experience and the kind of the arts and the creativity diminishing. I know. I mean, in my context, so I've been talking to the Eastern Powerhouse, and the resonance is remarkable. The same feelings, and this idea of the curriculum needs to sort of, well, I mean, we capturing it with sort of creativity, character, and enterprise. Not enterprise in terms of business, but enterprise in the sense of action. Reason for action. But I think it is, this, the world class or the world renowned system. That the world is buying our exams. There's no doubt that they're buying, IGCSE, GCSE, GC, IGCSE, GCSE, GCE. Gosh, a mouthful. But they're buying that. In fact, but I was talking to a CEO of an independent group that said basically, we'll buy the exams, and just let us do the teaching. Just we don't want the bit before, and they'll do all the creative not just arts, but they're thinking about how curriculum is put together. Leave us to do our stuff, and 6 weeks before the exams, we'll get the kids ready. And that's a very interesting approach, and it kind of counters that idea that the education system is the admired bit. I mean, I'm still thinking about your first statement. 46 kids in a classroom on the first floor. That I can hear that resounding around the English system now. What's being talked about workload, and how we would see that now. I'm with you. I was there, kind of not. I went through the secondary schools. I don't think I ever taught a class of 46 deliberately, but certainly, that it happened occasionally along the way. But it's that Andy Burnham, that idea that you're saying, that the mayors could have an influence on what curriculum is being constructed, or the intent, as we now call it, why this is there. That's really, that's a different leadership question for leaders to get into.
Definitely, because the issue here is that some multi-academy trusts will have different mayors. For example, the Culp Academies Trust has now got schools in the Wirral, in Manchester, in West Yorkshire, and in Stoke. So that and some of the curriculum models are that some of the multi-academy trusts, some, not all, but some, are quite rigid. So I'm interested to see how they're going to flex that model, and actually what happens if they say they're not. So who actually is going to broker that? Who's going to actually have the power? Now, I suspect a mayor, at the end of the day, I'd probably put my money on the mayor. I probably would. And I think that, and in a way, this is about, I think what's quite interesting with Andy Burnham's approach is that he did get the secondary heads together, and the colleges. He did engage with that, So, and of course, the power of business in that discussion, in that forum, is really quite important as well. Education is not just for economic growth and development. There is the personal element of it. But at the end of the day, most people, nearly all people, will need to find work, paid work, and so in a way, making sure that sort of discussion isn't one, because I've sat through, I'm sure you have, where business leaders and school leaders chat, but actually doesn't get very far. But when Burnham's bringing this together to create this qualification, these routes, these pathways, it's real, because it's going to have pressure on staffing, pressure on options, pressure on choices, and also, the lead into FE as well, so the relationship between secondary schools and FE needed to strengthen, as well, in order to make sure that pathway runs smoothly. So I can see, it being a very interesting period of time, and one where the context, again, going back to it, the context of Manchester. I was at a meeting with Steve Rotherham recently, the regional mayor for Liverpool, and actually Liverpool, its circumstances are completely different, to Manchester. It doesn't have as many of the multinationals in the city. It has a lot more SMEs. So how it addresses its economic regeneration in partnership with schools is very different. So I think understanding your circumstances, understanding the context in which the schools are working beyond just their in ordinary community, that's the thing that does my head in a bit, really. I mean, I've pushed, we are all part of an education service. We serve all of the children in that community, even if they don't go to our schools. And as such, there are too many senior leaders who have said to me in the past, well, okay, that's all right, but that's all very good. But actually what I'm about is looking after the children that come to our school. Well, I think that is lazy. I think that is just pushing all other issues away. Yes, day to day you go in, you've got these challenges, but actually there is this ecosystem of which you are part of, and decisions that you make, whether that's on, whether you exclude pupil A or whether you, and I've seen this recently, you denigrate another school, a local school, whether you put out that, to a parent, well, you really ought to, I don't know whether this is the right school for, all of this, you are part of that education ecosystem,
Absolutely.
So it's really, really gets my goat when I hear that. And actually I feel as though, we all, this is where the competition dries up for me. This is where it goes all nasty and awful. When the accountability system is so based on competition that decisions are being made in the best interest of the competition, as if it's like the Premiership league. I support Southend United. We are no longer in the Football League. If we see this, we cannot treat education like, well, Southend United can drop out of this. They just drop out. We cannot treat education in that way, but we have. So there will always be, under our current system, whether that's children who don't get their grade 4 in the GCSE maths, or whether or not there's going to be a proportion of schools that are going to be judged to be failing. There's always going to be that failing. And actually the system needs to be doing a lot more to support those schools, to prevent them from failing, or to help them when they show signs of failing, because this is part of the education ecosystem that we need to be part of.
Frank, it's a really interesting part. I mean, we've come around to this word failure. You talked about it at the right at the beginning with the kind of 11 plus kind of that. I've been heard to say several times, a state system that allows children to fail has failed in itself, and that every child deserves the opportunity to succeed. If they're going to have a successful life, they need to experience. That's not the kind of broad liberal idea that there's success for all and there's no failure. Well, the truth is, good invention happens because failure occurs, and we improve, and so we need to experience that. Not hitting the mark. We've got to experience that to improve. It gives us that energy to do something more. Well, I know, this. You kind of alluded to it. I know within the co-op, you put your name to an AP provision within that.
Well, they put it to me. I didn't want it. They wanted to call it the Frank Norris Centre, and I said, no. Thinking also about if it doesn't work, but they called it Frank's Place. But actually, I think it's now closed because it's gone back into the main provision. I think they looked at that because they needed some provision which was outside of the mainstream. But I think they've now stabilised stuff to the point that things have gone back in. But
that's really interesting to me, because here's the provision, and if it doesn't work, then there's an alternative. But actually, what we need to see is a system in the main provision that has that breadth to engage. And it's not that you failed in this, so we need to do something else. But we actually need to change what we're doing so that it is success for you. I didn't know that last part.
No,
that's interesting in that journey.
It's interesting that there is a survey out this week, wasn't it, to say that the proportion of children who don't like school has risen dramatically. Is it me? But no. Is it me? But actually, we go back to experiences. how rich and how exciting are these experiences that young people are getting. I see, I can see lots of sort of master classes whereby we can teach children how to pass an exam. But I have to say, anybody that's spoken to a sort of 13, 14-year-old, who's perhaps just about to embark on options, I'll tell you, there's a number of them there that think, well, I'm not that bothered, but actually I just want, I want to come to school and feel excited. I want to have a good relationship with the people that I sit next to. I want to have a good relationship with the teachers. I want to be able to say, I'm doing some really exciting things. I don't want to be told, if you don't do this, you're not going to get your GCSE. And I hear that so often. Yeah, we've got, the system has been completely driven by the accountability framework. And it's not just, is it? Let's be honest, if the primary colleagues here, think carefully about what is happening in year 5 and year 6. Think carefully about what's happening in year 4. Think carefully about what's happening in year 1. Think about all of those times. How rich is that provision? I tell you, it's not going to be as rich as it was when I was a head teacher. That might not be bad, but it's all about balance, and it's all about making sure that every now and again you take the chance to think about, well, hang on, have I got this right? Is this really, I've bent over so much to meet the needs of that I've actually sold my education philosophy. It's gone out the window. It's run away. I think it's really important every now and again we just reflect on that.
And that I agree with you entirely, and that's certainly the thing that I find. And I changed the screen because I wanted, those guitars in the background.
I wondered why you did that.
We share that the opportunity just to step back. And I think the one thing you said to me the other day was that you need a time to look at things differently. You need that time to kind of just decompress, and for some it's running, for some it will be music, for some it will be theatre, but for all it needs to be something, just to take that moment. And it's those points when you reflect, what is the big picture? What is it that I'm doing? How do I fit in this ecosystem? And are we doing good in all that we do? I know there's what's that Ofsted phrase that people are kind of, and really it's a good reflection, almost daily and weekly, just to make sure for the children's sake that we are doing good as we go. And I think we see too much of I'm just thinking of a school that I was in not long ago that they've got rid of everything that isn't exam validated. So year 11s are doing English, maths, science, and 4 options, and that's it. Nothing else. Right. No PE, no PSE, no RE, no nothing. And it, we talk about exam factories, and I do ask the question: what is this doing to the children? They, we know cognitive load theory, things that are, there's. It's not necessarily.
Chris, I know you want to talk about guitars, but Inspector Calls, there was a big discussion recently, wasn't there? About, well, why is Inspector Calls being chosen? Well, Inspector Calls being chosen as the sort of the text because there's loads of material on it. Actually, what I'd love to see, and this goes, I think you're going to ask me a question in a minute about one thing I could change, which leads neatly into it, is I'd love it to see a young teacher or a new teacher come in and say, Here's a book. I've been reading this book. I think it's absolutely amazing. I really do think now we need to focus in on this because actually there's so many themes here that we've been talking about for the last sort of 6 weeks or so. And you know what? We're going to take that, and that's going to be our GCSE textbook. This is it. Imagine that. Well, the academic, the examination system would hate it. But actually, what's likely to produce the best outcome? Is it the Inspector Calls? Great book. It's on all the theatres, isn't it? You're always going to find Inspector Calls. But actually, what's really going to excite the children? What is it? It's probably something that the teacher's going to bring that they genuinely have a love for. And so long as we can get the examination system to a point whereby that scrutiny is amongst our peers. So my brother used to be a very senior HMI in Eston, And we do a weekly podcast. He was a guest on a couple of times. We used to ask the question, well, there's one thing you could change, what would it be? And so Barry said the one thing he would do is go back to teacher assessed GCSE coursework. And doesn't mean to say that you don't have an exam, but actually weighting a lot more towards the coursework, because he said that was when done well, that was done really rigorously. You'd have to take all your material, all your examples of the work and everything. You'd have to take that to other schools. And actually, if you couldn't agree on the grading, then that knocked everybody down. So if there was only more done on that, then actually I think that would free people up, make people feel as though, yes, okay, there may be more. There may be more response, maybe a little bit more pressure. There's more freedom to do the things that you feel are right for your students, that are right for you, and actually just makes the whole thing feel as though we've valued the profession even more. I just feel as though we've lost control of too many things, and it's time to put more control back.
Would you say that's your one thing?
I would, and I'd say, I would. I'd say that we over test, and the stakes are far too high. And all I've been about is trying to make sure that we emphasize the incredible skills and talents of our teachers and the leaders. There are some amazing people out there, but actually putting them through an examination factory, during the middle of a hot summer, it's just ridiculous, isn't it? If we were starting from scratch, we wouldn't end up here. This is not where we'd want to be. But actually, all we're doing at the moment is maintaining somewhere where we don't want to be. And no one's really showing much appetite. Whether I'm not that encouraged by the Francis Crick Review. I hope it is going to get into the mire of examinations. It has to. But there's, I want to see much more radical reform coming through.
They've talked about it being reducing the high stakes element, but what does that really mean? There's lots to go in. Frank, we're coming very close to the hour. I just, how often do you get to play the guitar? Tell us a little bit about that.
I used to dabble in it when I was a teenager, and then when I was 60, my family bought me some lessons at a local guitar teacher, Chris Hemingway, and I still go to Chris every fortnight. I'm struggling at the moment with a sort of damaged finger on my right hand, but I play probably every other day for about half an hour, which I can do now. When I was CEO, obviously it was less, but actually I still managed to squeeze it in. It was my release, and I'm not great, but it's as Chris always says, it's the journey. Frank, it's the journey. You'll never be Eric Clapton, not that I'd want to be honest, but I do get a great release, and I think there's something about connecting with the music. Great lover of James Taylor's music, and he has a finger picking style, and having listened to his albums for many years, actually trying to play, it brings a different sort of experience to it, and the complexity of it. But also, even if you just get sort of 6 or 7 bars correct, you feel, there's something else happening here. I do play a lot more than I used to, but I'd encourage anybody who's leading anything, make sure you've got an outlet. Make sure you've got an outlet, because this is the place to go to get your solitude and your peace, whether that's running or whatever it may be. But you need something.
I used to teach creativity because my subject was design technology, and you actually getting your brain to go to a different space, to do something different, whether that's in the garden, whether that's in a workshop, which are the two things for me, but or just get outside or play your guitar or be somewhere or be talking to people differently. It actually makes your brain work differently, and you make connections that you've not thought of before. And you need to do it. You also need fresh air. You just need to be outside breathing. But that's our the grey hair allows us to do that and say, look, if you're in the system, you need to make sure you've got time out of the system.
Yeah.
Frank, I really appreciate the conversation this morning. It's been a real pleasure. Thank you for
I just hope I haven't witted on too long for you, Chris, and I hope those who are listening or watching have gained something from it. But yeah, thank you for the invite.
It's a valuable journey. I think your insights on the mayoral impact and the scope and scene of education and the power influences that are coming. It's not just going to be the DFE and frameworks and guidance. It's going to be local economy, and I guess that's why we called it that. And I guess, you know, if anyone wants to talk about that, you know, what's the opportunity? You know, Smart Curriculum, we've captured that in the sector analysis approach, where primary, secondary are looking at those sectors and how they might respond and what experiences that we can put in the curriculum, and not just in the curriculum, but in the lived experience of children to open their eyes to more. So if you want to, please do get in touch. We've got I think there's details here on the screen, so just get in touch with us if you'd like to. But the point of this conversation was to take that Friday focus, a moment to step back and just to think. So Frank, thank you so much. Really appreciate your input. We're going to end there. We'll see you in 2 weeks' time for another conversation. I think we're there at our anniversary of a year, but it's been a great conversation. Thank you, Frank, and we'll see you in 2 weeks' time.
Thank you. Bye-bye, everyone.